Hello, welcome to today's video, which is going to be a tutorial. And boy oh boy do I have something to tickle your brains. It is some alternate decorations for a holiday / Christmas tree. It is called Scroties, and I'm going to show you how to make some out of clay. And hopefully you enjoy the process, you find it easy and fun and insert nice word here. Please note that all the materials used can be found in the description box if you just expand it. And if you have any feedback for me, I would love to hear it. Probably not. Let's start with drawing some patterns or templates for our Scroties. Draw a circle, try to keep the features quite large. It is a small ball and I feel that large features like those give it more character and helps it look more interesting. I was trying to find something that was my style but also looked a little bit Christmassy, and the first two designs didn't hit that for me. So then I thought, well, what about a Christmas ornament? It has those segments, those different colors, and it's quite recognizable. So I tried to use that. I decided to give it some sideways eyes, a very big smile with some cute little teeth. Once I was done with this design, I felt like it looked Christmassy. I decided to make another one with some snowflakes on the cheeks because I thought that screamed Christmas, and those were the two designs that I decided to go with. I am creating a ball of foil. But note that I am not compacting it in my hand. It's quite loose, it has some give to it. And this is quite important for the end when you're poking holes or when you're carving. The more compact it is, the heavier it will be, and the more compact it is, the harder it will be to cut through, poke through, pierce through it. So I do want some give, and I use 2 layers as well to kind of control the amount that I'm going to be compacting the foil. After I've rolled it and got it into something that's quite ballish, circular, I then take either a silicone wedge or even my bone folder, and I will be using my bone folder here. And I start smoothing out the edge of the ball. I want to get rid of those really big rivets and dips. It's not going to be 100% smooth, it's not going to be 100% compacted, but it is going to be smoother than what it was when I started. And the only way I can describe doing this is kind of like icing a cake. You spread the icing, you don't push the icing into the cake. So the outer portion of the ball will be slightly compacted, but it will not be pushed into the middle of the ball itself. Once you've got that smooth, wonderful exterior, you're going to take some clay. I'm using air dry clay, white clay, and the brand is Primo. I like this brand. I don't feel like it has a lot of fibers once it dries, and that really works when I'm trying to do smoother paint jobs and I don't want to sand. I'm not a fan of sanding. I make my clay extremely malleable. I roll it out with my rolling pin, which is just a brush on its side. And I get a piece that I'm sure will cover all the ball with a little bit extra. I'm trying to keep that extra clay on one side of the ball, and to wrap the ball with no air pockets, I start wrapping the clay around my finger, kind of like wrapping a dumpling. I then gather everything up and I squeeze the extra clay together until it closes and try to keep it, as I said, just on one portion. So I've got an even layer across most of the ball, but I have a much thicker layer at the front. I have water on hand and I use that water to spray, and you can see I'm rolling the ball by cupping my hands. I take the ball and I roll it in a circular motion, and sometimes I also open my hands and I then roll it across my palms. The reason I open my hands is so that I have more control over where I'm pushing the ball. A lot of rubbing and rolling later, and I can see that there's an air bubble here. So I'm going to use a ball tool and I'm just going to poke it out. You can use a needle, use a craft knife, and I'm going to squeeze it, kind of like squeezing a pimple. And then I'm going to cover it. I don't want to rip the clay off or restart. It's just poke, extract the air, and seal it back up. This is as round as I can get this ball. What you can do is, if you want to make it smoother or take away fingerprints, is just use water on a paintbrush. Air dry clay becomes activated or malleable again once you use water, and burnish it with your finger. If you have very fibrous air clay, you can sand it once it's dry, or try using the same method with water and a paintbrush, and those fibers usually do stick down. Spend as much or as little time as you want trying to smooth your ball out. I want it to be a little bit whimsical, dented. I want it to look a little bit rough compared to my first edition, so I'm not going for perfection in this particular exercise. My balls are not dry, but they're not extremely wet, and I'm going to start carving on some of the features. So I'm trying to create the first pattern we drew, this ornament ball, and I'm using the bone folder to create segments on the ball, which is just intersectional lines across the whole ball. And I'm trying to keep them as straight as possible, and I'm trying to keep my best line work for the front of the ball, which is that thickest part of the clay that we closed over. Try and do this once again when the ball is wet, but not glistening from water. And the reason why you want it a bit wet is you can then easily carve out the features. And I'm using my X-Acto knife, craft knife, to draw on the eyes and the mouth as close to my sketch as possible. Obviously it cannot be the same. I'm not that detailed of a worker. The sketch is to give you an idea. Don't hold yourself to the sketch. You're going to see as you carve through that you might not be able to get it that way, or you might get it in a better way. Whatever we colored black when we were drawing, that's where we want to take out or extract the clay. I'm going to dig out the eyes totally. I want to add eyeballs a little bit later. I think it is much easier to add eyes that way. And this is a bit of a slow and tedious process, especially if your clay is quite wet. It's easier to dig out, but it's also easier to squash the ball and lose some of that detail that you've put on. Another tip, trick, or idea is, if you can, try and keep a thin layer of clay over the foil, because foil doesn't always take acrylic paint that well. If you cannot leave a thin layer of clay on the foil, that's okay. I'm going to show you how to cover it with some slip. For ball number 2, we're going to try some different things. One of them is we're going to cut out the whites of the eye, and we're going to leave the foil exposed. I thought that this might create some nice effects when colored lights were shining on it from the Christmas tree, and it would go well with the snowflake theme that I had in my mind. It was also much easier. For the mouth, I cut out the top of the mouth and I flipped that entire portion back to create a lip. As you can see, it's just lifting it up from the foil and then pushing it back, and I used water and my finger to smooth it down and make sure that there were no rough edges and it looked like a lip. I used my craft knife to make sure that everything was smooth and cut properly, and I used my bone folder to push in the foil in the mouth and the whites of the eye just to create more depth. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just sticking out right next to the lip and you could see that there was some depth. You could put something inside that mouth. I do want to say, when you're pushing in, try not to compress the clay and try not to compress the ball around it. You don't want the entire ball to collapse on you. I'm making slip here, which is just a mixture of water and clay, and I'm going to use that to stick the eyes in to the sockets and cover up sections of the ball I'm not happy with. So to make the eyes, I just made 2 little round circles of clay. I put the slip, which once again is clay and water, just a mixture, no ratio, it just needs to be sticky. And I put it into the eyes and then I stuck the balls in. And try and make sure that the balls are both sticking out at the same angle. And if they aren't, take one out, flatten it, adjust it, make it smaller. This is what I had to do here because one of my sockets were deeper than the other ones. And once I get my eye in and it looks okay, I take more of that slip and I shove it into the crevices. I try and create a little bit more, I want to say tissue, it's kind of padding. I just don't want it to be a deep recess into the eye. I do want it to look like there's something connecting that eyeball into the socket. I also take slip and put it into any other crevices that need attention, and here you can see me just shoving it into the mouth to smooth the mouth out. I carved that mouth out and it was looking like somebody had used a knife to do it, which is exactly what I did. So using my silicone tool and using my paintbrush, I put in the slip and then I made it as smooth as possible so that when I was painting I had a nice smoother surface and it was just a little bit easier for me. When you have a lot of divots, it's a little bit more difficult to paint. If you don't have silicone tools, that's totally okay. Paintbrushes and needle tools work perfectly fine, and I actually found it better to use the paintbrush. Now I'm going to make a hole in this scroty, and it's not completely dry, it's still a bit soft, and the ball tool goes in quite easily and I can feel it going through the clay, through the first layer, and then right into the actual foil. And because it's not compacted, that's simple to do. I tried to make the hole big enough so that I can shove in some cotton or even a nail later on. If it's too little, it's going to be difficult to do that. Before I let them dry totally, I'm going to add some teeth to the second scroty, and doing that while wet is difficult, and I think my advice is do it when it's dry. I think it would be a lot easier, but I also just wanted to show you that you can do it when it's wet. The reason why it's difficult to do it when it's wet is it's still soft and malleable and it pushes all over the place and you have to work very gently. It just makes for very delicate work. It flops all over the place. It doesn't look stable. It doesn't look like it has any structural integrity when you stick it on there. And you can see that I'm playing with the positioning and then pressing it down to decrease the size of the teeth as well as stick it to the scroty, and scratching around the joints to connect the teeth to the clay. And I'm trying to give you a close-up shot here and just demonstrate what I've just explained. And I hope you can see that those teeth are quite flimsy. These teeth are quite flimsy. These balls are now going to be put near my heating, but not somewhere where it's too hot or too cold that it won't dry or that it will crack. Just in a temperate place overnight to dry. They have to dry before I paint them, because then they'll be strong enough to work on, and also the paint won't just slough off once I use it. If you use it on wet clay, you're not going to have a good time. Now with the dry ball, I just want to show you how easy it is to make a hole. I'm taking an awl and I'm not shoving it in, I'm using a drilling turning motion, and boop, it goes into the ball and I push it in as deep as I want it. The deeper I go, the bigger the hole on top gets, and that's a good enough hole for me to shove in some thread. Try and keep the nail hole or the hole to the center. If it's not in the center, your scroty is going to be lying to the side, which is kind of what mine looks like. When the ball is dry, I'm using my ball tool to deepen those intersectional lines. It might be easier to carve when it's dry, but it does make some dust and I don't really enjoy the dust so much. Onto the stain. I'm using a mixture of burnt umber, acrylic ink, and black. I'm using a ratio probably of 3:1. So definitely more burnt umber to black. I want the stain to be a dark brown, but I also don't want it to be too overpowering. I use this and I cover the entire ball, the front and the back, and wherever there's crevices, I make sure that this ink, and that's why I'm using ink, gets deep into it. I want every crevice to be covered so that when I paint, there's no big white spots sticking out. It might work for you to do one side of the ball and then go on to the second, or if you're really messy like me, which you will see as we progress that I'm messy, then just paint everything at once. Mess your fingers, mess the table. It's Christmas, just be messy. Now it's time for the fun part. I'm going to color this ball and I'm using Cad Red, and I'm going to be coloring the alternating lines Cad Red, and then I'm going to go for Phthalo Green. This is my first layer, so I don't have to worry about being too precise. I'm using a slightly larger brush than I will as we progress. This is just to give it that first layer, give it coverage. Be aware of the kind of paints that you're using. Some colors are transparent, don't get frustrated by that. Layer them on, mix them with a bit of white if you need, and try and be careful. I thought a very good idea, and it is a good idea, to paint these balls would be to stick them on the ball tool that I used to make the hole. But I wasn't careful there and it went over the paint and now it's blue. So I just used my paintbrush, took off that color, shoved in the ball tool so that I had a bit of a stand so I could paint this a little bit easier and stop messing my fingers and touching the paint as I went along. Going in with my green now, and I know that it doesn't pop right now on these balls and it looks a little bit drab, but try and think of it like an acrylic painting. First layers always make you think, what am I doing with my life? And the third layers are usually where it comes along. My second ball I'm covering with ultramarine blue because I want to have that snowy, icy, sky blue effect a little bit later on. My first layers have dried and I've started using fluorescent pink. You can get them in Liquitex, you can get them in Talons. It's one of my favorite colors. I'm using fluorescent pink to make that red pop. Instead of painting it over red again, I think it would be better to add different colors, mix it. You could use a Cad Red light if you wanted, or if you don't have those colors, you could probably use as your first layer an alizarin, alizarin crimson, and then cover that with Cad Red. I'm also going for some green gold now over the phthalo green, and then I will put fluorescent green over that. I also took my cloth on that first segment that I painted and I wet it a little bit and I picked some of it off. It was looking a little bit too perfect for me and I wanted these dark spots of the underpainting to show, or the stain. So be mindful, if you want it to look pristine and perfect, you might not even use that stain to begin with because it's a white surface. And that white base will show these colors off quite nicely. But if you are doing this, I doubt that you want something conventional anyway, because these things are slightly horrific. I'm now mixing turquoise with the ultramarine blue, and in some places I'm going to make sure that the turquoise is a little bit more heavily layered on, and in other places I'll let the darker blue show through. But it's just kind of to get this icy kind of vibe going on. You can see this ball is more blended than the other one, and on most of my Scroties, if not all of them, I've used different painting techniques. I think if you wanted a more cohesive Scrotie collection, you would use one medium or mode of painting, but that's not my aim. My aim is just to have fun and use everything I know. So you'll see that the painting techniques on these two have been very different. It's time to add some details to the Scrotie. The layers are done, so I'm going to use titanium buff and a mixture of titanium white to add some teeth and some eyes. If I want them to pop out more, I use white. If I want them to look a little bit more like they've been through something, I use titanium buff with a small layer of whatever colors on my palette. To make the eyeballs, I'm going to use this detailed pen and black. I added eyeballs and then I just made like tiny rings around them just so that he looked a little bit more loco. I think that if I just had that one little ball on there, he looked a little bit scared maybe. And now with these circles around the actual pupil, he looks like he's crazy for Christmas. To my eye sky, I want to add snowflakes to the cheek, and I decided to use my paint pen, first of all to color the teeth white. I think that looks good, but as I tried to put it on the rest of the ball, I realized just like my black paint marker, it wasn't going to flow, and that's why I used my detail brush. So I switched back to my detail brush And to draw snowflakes, I did a little point and I did 6 lines. So I did an X and then I put a line across that X. And then I used my ball tool and my paintbrush to add dots and marks to try and get what I think is a snowflake shape. The trick to this entire snowflake thing was that I had to do 2. So the first one wasn't difficult, but the second one was difficult because I needed to get it to look similar. And I have 2 very different looking snowflakes on his cheeks. For the eyes, I decided to use orange. I used it because it's a contrasting color and I thought it would look cool with the blue. Instead of putting an intricate snowflake at the back, I decided to spatter it. I mixed teal and white and a little bit of water. I don't regret that choice. I think it looks quite cool. It does look like snow and it was very fun to do. So that's another technique if you ever want to fill up some space and you make your own scroty. I don't know if it's going to be snow or blood, but you have my permission. Go, my child. On to gluing in the thread. These are 14 centimeters long. I'm going to use my glue gun and my awl to put them into the balls. I'm going to loop them together and I'm going to put some glue over the top of the hole that I made. And then I'm going to put the thread on top and I'm going to shove it through the hole with the awl. So here's the example with the blue ball. I fill it with glue. Try and get white. I only have yellow. I put the thread in and then I shove the thread through. I put my finger on to prevent the thread from coming back out. It's not the neatest way to do it. I think it will look better if you use clear glue, but you can cover this with the same color or similar color paint afterwards. And I do try and use my knife to cut off some of the extra glue. It is better if you work while it just gets hot. I am also securing it with extra glue because why not? And once again, I plan on painting or just touching it up with paint afterwards. And the white thread is purely coincidental. I painted it black afterwards. You could use gold thread, you could use whatever you have. The next method, which I like so much more, is I just put hot glue in the hole and I push in a nail. This nail is 3 centimeters long, and then I use my knife while the hot glue is warm and I just scrape it off. And you check that it's fast, wrap the thread around, tie it, glue it on, but just check that it is fast and pull it a little bit away from itself. I'm going to just show you the best way to paint with your finger. Paint over the glob of glue that you have on there. After your scroties are done, hang them on your tree and try to make sure that they're facing outwards instead of inwards so you can see the zany characters that you've made, and hopefully you end up with a tree as disturbingly beautiful as mine. You have made it to the end of this tutorial. Congratulations! I want to say thank you very much for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it useful. If you haven't found an entire technique that you could use, that you would have found parts of a technique that you could use, I just hope you found value. And if you do make these scroties, I hope that you will tag me on Instagram or Facebook. My links are in the description below. And yeah, I hope you had a very nice time. I hope to see you for my next tutorial, or in one of my vlogs, or just in general in the internet space. Keep safe and goodbye.